So we were discussing about the numerical evaluation of a domain integral under distorted domains, or the after the parent elements have been distorted into the actual geometry which needs to be modeled. And we saw that the Cartesian derivatives can be expressed in terms of derivatives in terms of local coordinates, in which the variation is known by using the Jacobian of transformation. And for that transformation to for that equivalence to exist, it is essential that the Jacobian of transformation should be positive definite. That means that is a mathematical statement, condition, precondition of the physical condition that every single point in undistorted parent element corresponds to only one point. There is only one point corresponding to a distorted domain, the distorted domain, right? So there is one-to-one correspondence between the domain, parent domain, undistorted geometry, and the domain part of the domain that is used using distortion. And then there is a after the variables are transformed, then of course there is going to be new integration in terms of xi, eta, zeta, and the variables of integration, range of integration would be between -1 to +1. And this is a ready-made situation for the application of Gauss-Legendre quadrature. And the order of quadrature, as we saw, is defined by whatever is the order of quadrature required for exact evaluation of the integral in undistorted domain. So whatever is the polynomial term that we have in domain integral, whatever is the highest order of quadrature rule, lowest order of quadrature rule required for exact integration of the exact evaluation of the integral. And of course, further higher order integration is not going to change the result. We will keep on getting the same results. So there is no point in going for a higher order quadrature. We can find out a priori based on the what is the highest degree of polynomial term, and based on that we can determine what is the degree of quadrature, or what is the order of quadrature rule that is required, and that is referred to as full integration or full quadrature rule. And triangular and tetrahedral domains, their natural coordinates or local coordinates, they vary from 0 to 1, and they have similar quadrature rules, sampling points, and associated weighting coefficients. And similar numerical integrations can also be developed for uh, these geometries, triangular and tetrahedral domains, elements, and they can be used in analysis, finite element modeling, just as rectangle and hexahedral elements are used. So now we come to the boundary integrals. So this generic form of boundary integral in the weak form of weighted residual statement is this boundary integral vector, this force vector nodal equivalent forces is given as boundary integral of n transpose t evaluated over the boundary. So T is the vector of tractions, and N is the matrix of weighting functions or the interpolation functions. And boundary integral is evaluated if the element boundary coincides with the domain boundary. So that is, we discussed this earlier, that in the interior part of the domain, the contributions coming from adjacent elements, they would cancel each other, and there is no point in evaluating the boundary integral when that boundary is shared by two elements. So we evaluate the boundary term boundary integral only when the element boundary coincides with the problem boundary or domain boundary of the original problem. Now, one thing that is very interesting that you should appreciate, that the boundary will always be defined by the local coordinate xi, eta, zeta taking value either -1 or +1, right? Because that is the end of the that denotes the end of the element. So once the problem is defined in terms of xi, eta and zeta coordinates, so the boundary is defined by uh, the values xi, eta, zeta, one of the variables, actually local variables, local coordinates taking the value of extreme, the end of the domain range, end of the range, and that defines the appropriate boundary. So one of the coordinates says xi is constant along the element boundary, and the resulting integral integrands on the element boundaries may be evaluated by Gauss quadrature of suitable order. So we just substitute xi is equal to let's say +1 or -1, and whatever the remaining terms are, whatever is the boundary term, highest order, highest degree term, polynomial term, in the remaining variable we use the Gauss quadrature of suitable order to evaluate the integral, right, between these remaining variable. Again, that variable will also range from -1 to +1. So the Gauss quadrature is very uh, very much applicable for evaluation of the boundary integrals as well. So I would recommend you to please go through the examples given in S.S. Rao's book. That would be very useful and educating. And also you can have a look at the book by Cook, although the examples are more lucid in S.S. Rao's book. Now we come to the issue of accuracy. See, the problem is we spent so much time in discussing the correct ways of deriving interpolation functions in the rectangular domain or triangular domain, that interpolation functions should meet all these conditions and so on. And after taking so much of pain in deriving those interpolation functions, we now distort the element geometry. And now the natural question arises, does this distortion of the geometry have any influence on the accuracy of the finite element? For example, in the undistorted domain, let's say 8-node serendipity element, we have guarantee of complete quadratic variation. Now, if this element is a 8-node serendipity element, if it is distorted into some other shape, so the question is, does this completeness up to second degree polynomial, is it guaranteed in the distorted domain as well, or it is something is being compromised? So obviously there are ways to find out, and rigorous proof can be obtained for this. But let us, I just want to discuss here one aspect to uh, make you understand that there are no free lunches anywhere. So what we gain by freedom in modeling of arbitrary domain, obviously there has to be some kind of payback for that, right? And that pay and that penalty for gaining this, the price that we pay for gaining this freedom in the modeling of geometry, or eliminating the discretization error almost completely, is that in the distorted domain the completeness does get a hit. So whatever was guaranteed to be complete up to at least second degree polynomial need not be complete up to second degree, and the rate of convergence would be governed by only linear term. So rate of convergence will of course deteriorate in most of the cases, if not all. So let us look at this in a little detail. So element distortions in general reduce the degree of completeness in polynomial approximation and adversely affects the rates of convergence. But these element distortions, they allow for mesh gradation, right? So if we did not have this possibility of distortion or modeling of arbitrary domain, then if we start with a small mesh, fine mesh, then we would continue to use with small, fine mesh all through, right? And that would lead to a very very large problem size. We need small mesh, small finite element size, and very fine mesh in the regions where the strain gradients are expected to be very steep, like the places where sharp corners or in the neighborhood of crack tip and so on, where we do expect a very high degree of steep strain gradients, strain and stress gradients to be there. Strain is varying very very rapidly. So in order to capture that rapid variation, we do need to consider very fine elements. But if we have fine elements there and we do not have this possibility of element distortion, then we will be forced to carry on with this fine mesh all through the domain, right? Or it will be very very uh, long domain. Slowly we can increase using triangular and combination of triangular and rectangular elements, and it will, that transition from fine to coarse mesh in the region of smoother gradients will take much larger transition zone. But with the help of these element distortions that are possible, we can effect these mesh gradation and smooth transition from fine mesh to coarse mesh very very seamlessly and very very effectively. And the numerical stability of computations is strongly influenced by the extent of distortion. For example, I just mentioned that in yesterday's class I mentioned that if the distortion is very severe, then of course it is going to be Jacobian is not going to be positive definite, and everything uh, would fall apart, right? So if the distortions are very large or very strong severe distortions, then obviously there are going to be some numerical instabilities that would happen. But these numerical instabilities are sometimes used to our advantage. For example, if by some kind of mapping uh, it may so happen that there may be singularities that may develop in the strain field by this geometric distortion, right? Now that can be used to advantage for modeling the certain kinds of problems. For example, I just referred to the problem of crack tip. So at the tip of the crack, the strain and therefore stress is infinite, and it is called quarter point singularity. If you look at the classical solution of the strain field at the tip of the crack, if you truncate it after first term, then it is first term would be proportional to square root of the distance. The strain field in the neighborhood of that crack tip would vary as 1 over square root of the distance from the crack tip. So at the crack tip it is going to be 1 over square root of 0, right? So that it is that kind of strain field that exists in the neighborhood of crack tip. So if I do not if I use conventional finite elements to model, then obviously there is no way I can have infinite strain present in the any numerical computation. Infinity doesn't exist on a computer, if you recall our initial discussion, right? So there is no way we can have infinite representation. So it can be represented only by a very large number. That's all. But it is possible to make use of numerical instability of computations by using severe distortion and model this singularity in finite element analysis. And that is often used for elastic fracture mechanics problems, that is referred to as quarter point singularity. And you can actually read the example uh, in several textbooks of finite element analysis. You would find in almost all. I mean, Cook's book has that example, and Zinkowitz also discusses that problem, and so does Reddy's book on finite element. So it can be used very effectively for modeling singularity in spatial cases, and this is called square root. For example, square root singularity in fracture linear fracture mechanics problem. And new finite elements can be developed by the process of degeneration. For example, two nodes of four node rectangle can be mapped to one point, leading to a three node triangle. And if we look at the complete formulation and map two nodes at one point and analyze this complete distorted figure, we'll find that the strain field actually corresponds to the constant strain triangle. As long as we stay away from that node where two points have been merged into one, right? That point is of course is a point of singularity. Jacobian would be zero there. There is a non-uniqueness at the point of coalesce where two nodes coalesce into one point, right? But everywhere else, away from that point, you will find that the strain is of course going to be is constant. The element behavior is same as three node constant strain triangle, and in case of three node constant strain triangle, anyway you evaluate the uh, domain integrals are evaluated at the centroid one point quadrature. So there is no need to worry about the singularity that exists at the point where two nodes overlap, right? So and this process of degeneration is very powerful technique, and it is used for the generation of new elements. For example, transition between plane stress element to beam element, we can have a degeneration an element a transition element in between the two to facilitate this transfer of behavior. One side of the element would have compatibility with the plane stress element, and other side would have compatibility with the uh, Euler-Bernoulli beam element, and so on. Similarly, the degeneration process of continuum elements can be used for development of plates and shells, which are essentially continuum, three-dimensional continuum elements with certain kinematic constraints imposed on the deformation field, and that leads to generation development of new elements. So this degeneration is a very powerful technique, and using these basic finite elements that we have discussed, we can actually keep on developing new families of finite elements and use them for our analysis. So now we move on to, I just in the beginning of today's talk, I hinted at the problems that we may get into by using distortion. We have been very careful in developing the elements and the interpolation model meeting all the requirements. But uh, in the process of analysis and in case of integration, numerical integration, the final analysis, the element may exhibit certain problems. So one of the problems that is very common with the lower order elements, for example, these elements which are only complete up to first degree, so four node rectangle, for example, right? And we also encountered this parasitic shear problem in the discussion of first order shear deformation theory of beam elements, shear flexible beams, right? So that is essentially the problem, because we did not pay attention to fourth C of interpolation or of finite element approximation, that is the consistency of approximation. And that is what we will see here, that inconsistency of approximation is what is leading to these problems, what we call as parasitic shear. So bottom line is, sometimes rigorously derived finite elements do not behave well. Consistency of field approximation with regard to the mechanics of the problem is not adhered to, or is not uh, reflected in the approximation. So let us look at the case of four node rectangle plane stress element under pure flexure. So what does it look like? A four node rectangle. So this is the dotted shape. This is what it has. Four node rectangle, which is the approximation is bilinear. So it is linear in x multiplied by linear variation in y. So you have four terms: constant term plus linear term in x plus linear term in y, and a cross term xy, right? And if it is subjected to a pure flexure, let's say the moment, sagging moment applied on both sides, how does it vary? It will take this shape, right? Because there will be compression at the top fiber and there will be extension at the bottom fiber, so that is what it is trying to achieve. But this curvature that it should take, it should have normally taken in the case of pure flexure, this element is incapable of doing this, because there is no variation. V as a function of x square, I mean this variation is with respect to x, and it should vary with respect to as a x square term, right? So v as a function of x square is simply not there in the approximation. So there is no way this element can take what you expect it to take, that curvature role, constant curvature shape. So it will do what it can best accommodate, that is model compression at the top and tension extension at the bottom, and then linear variation in between the two, right? So the field approximation is incapable of taking the curvature required for pure flexure deformation. The element can only take the shape of bilinear deformation, because that is what it is constrained to do by virtue of its interpolation model, that is u is a function, is uh, u is equal to a0 plus a1x plus a2y plus a3xy, and v is equal to b0 plus b1x plus b2y plus b3xy. So there is no x square term, there is no y square term, so there is no way you can have this variation, or if the moment is applied uh, along in this direction around 4, 3 and 1, 2 edge, then there would be problem with deformation u, variation with respect to y. So the element can only take the shape of bilinear deformation as shown in this solid figure. And this bilinear deformation will be incompatible in an assembly of elements. So for example, if you have another element here, that element, this side edge would try to bend like this, and this element which is this side, which is supposed to be compatible or continuous continuity of deformation, is bending like this, right? So now you have a problem, which one to take precedence, which one overrides, which one governs, which deform shape governs. So the compromise is struck, and both the elements join hands and say that we would just play along happily, we will maintain compatibility, and that can be done only in one way, that is, no deformation is predicted at all. The only compromise solution is no deformation at all, and that leads to what we call as element locking. That is, no amount of load, no matter how large the moment you apply, no matter how large uh, loads you apply, flexural, the element just won't deform, won't show any deformation whatsoever, right? And this is happening when element is derived using all uh, with complete rigor. There are no approximation as far as formulation is concerned. We develop the weak form, we meet all the requirements of the development of approximate solution using weak form of weighted residual statement, and then we end up with this issue. So why does this happen? So let us consider the displacement field in a 4-node triangle. So as I said, u within the element as a function of xy is given as a0 plus a1x plus a2y plus a3xy, and v as a function of xy, the displacement along y direction is, let's say, b0 plus b1x plus b2y plus b3xy, and the shear strain can be given as del v by del x plus del u by del y. So the rotation, the distortion in xy plane. So if we compute this, then we have a2 plus b1, so that is what we have, del u by del y, so that is a2, and del v by del x, so that gives us b1. So this is the constant term, and x variation is just a3 and y variation is just b3. And the variation of pure, in the case of pure flexure, the shear strain should vanish, obviously. So the vanishing shear strain condition, if this shear strain has to vanish, then the coefficients should vanish. So that means the constant term a2 plus b1 should be equal to 0. Variation with respect to x should vanish, so a3 is equal to 0, and variation with respect to y should vanish, so b3 is equal to 0. Now, whenever we talk of shear strain has to be an interplay of deformation along x and deformation along y. I cannot have a shear strain in which only one deformation component participates. And that is a problem here. These two constraints, that is a3 is equal to 0 and b3 is equal to 0, they imply or they bring in participation of only one displacement component. So here this applies only to displacement field of u, and this implies displacement field of v, right? There is no interplay between u and v in variation with respect to x and variation with respect to y, and that is a problem, that is a serious problem. That is in violation of the basic mechanics of shear strain. So these last two constraints are spurious because those involve only one displacement field, that is u or v in each case, right? So how to solve this problem? One way to solve this problem is the condition, how do we make the shear strain vanish? So what is the full order quadrature required for 2 by 2 4 node rectangle? The full quadrature order is 2 by 2, right? So that means the sampling points would be plus or minus 1 by root 3. Now what is the, let me go back to the equation here. What is the strain here? What is the strain field at the centroid? This is the centroid of the element. Can anybody tell me what is the strain field at this point? Looking at the deformed shape?
0.
Yes. All strains would vanish here. Right? So epsilon xx, you can very well see that it is 0 at this, this is the neutral axis. So epsilon xx is 0, and so is the shear strain. Right? It's a completely symmetric system. So what if I use, instead of 2 by 2 quadrature, what if I use 1 point quadrature here? 1 point quadrature, the sampling point corresponds to the centroid of the element. That is, xi is equal to 0 and eta is equal to 0, or x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0. That is the sampling point of 1 point quadrature rule. So if I use 1 point quadrature rule, then magically the problem solves. How? Because in this shear strain, x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0. It really doesn't matter what is A3 or whether these fields interact or not. X is 0, y is equal to 0. So the term, I mean the shear strain, does not at all figure in any computation whatsoever. Right? So this is a, I mean, initially it was done, found very accidentally. I mean, this was a serious problem, and in the early days of development of finite elements, massive research effort went into this. I mean, trying to diagnose what is happening here and why such a rigorous development of the element is creating problem in such a simple problem, such a simple case. And if it fails in such a simple case, how much faith can we put on the results that are predicted for more complicated analysis? Right? So there was a existential crisis in finite element community when this problem was realized. Right? So the constant A3 is equal to 0 may be translated in terms of nodal displacement values that you can see. A3 is equal to U1 plus U3 minus U2 plus U4, and which has to be 0, and that can only have one possible feasible solution, that is Ui is equal to 0. All the displacements at all nodes should vanish. Similarly, transverse displacement V also vanishes, and the element locks into unrealistic deformation mode of zero longitudinal and transverse displacements in response to pure flexure, so as to maintain the condition of vanishing shear strain. This phenomena is referred to as the shear locking. Higher order elements do not lock in so dramatic fashion, but the rate of convergence of the computed solution is adversely affected. So the solution may converge, but it will do so only with very, very fine elements, much refinements. So several possibilities exist to rectify the problem. One is that of reduced integration, what is I was referring to. Instead of 2 by 2 integration, which refers to the full quadrature, we use one order lower. So the domain integral is intentionally under evaluated by using a lower order of quadrature, to alleviate the locking problem. So this solution was found by trial and error. I mean, just it was a problem. Probably somebody might have accidentally given a wrong input, and suddenly the element started behaving exceptionally well in comparison with uh, absolutely dismal behavior when you are doing everything correctly, right? And you intentionally evaluate the integral of that stiffness matrix B transpose dB instead of using 2 by 2 integration rule, which will require 4 sampling points. You evaluate it only using 1 sampling point, and suddenly you have uh, some reasonable numbers as solution. Right? So that is what we call as reduced integration. Second one is of course inclusion of incompatible modes, and that is by adding consistency in field approximation. What is missing by way of consistency in connection with the basic problems, basic phenomena of structural mechanics. So we need to bring in that consistency in the approximation. But by bringing in that consistency of approximation would involve bringing in some terms which would violate the compatibility across inter-element boundaries. So compatibility is approximation. So now we are willing to sacrifice compatibility in favor of consistency with basic mechanics of the problem. So these additional terms lead to incompatibility of primary variables across element boundaries, because these incompatible modes, they would be different for different elements. So obviously two different elements, even if they are adjacent, there is no way these can be considered to be compatible in every sense. So these additional terms lead to incompatibility of primary variables across element boundaries, and uh, if they are incompatible, then obviously we have to be very careful, and therefore there are some guidelines for the choice of incompatible modes, and suitable incompatible modes should have zero contribution to the domain integrals under constant state of stress to ensure finite element solution. So eventually all your finite element equilibrium equation is represented by cumulative sum at accumulated as the numerical quadrature. I mean the integrand evaluated at different sampling points, and they are being added up. So when you add up these contributions, so there may be some deformation incompatible modes which may have zero, which may evaluate to zero when at those sampling points, right? So if we choose incompatible modes such that these have zero contribution to the domain integrals under constant state of stress, that is the minimum requirement, constant state of strain and constant state of stress. So if the element under is subjected to constant stress, then the strain energy contribution of these incompatible modes should be zero. So if that condition is satisfied, then the finite element solution would converge. And reduced integration, as I said earlier, that can trigger instability in computed solution for some loading or deformation patterns. I would recommend you to go through very beautiful examples of these communicable instability, in which some loading pattern or some deformation pattern, imposed deformation pattern, can trigger can instability in the entire mesh. It is communicated. So you apply this at some point, some edge, some boundary, but over as this information gets propagated, the deformed shape, the solution keeps on getting polluted by these instability, triggered instability in the solution, right? So I recommend you to go through the examples and discussions in the book of Cook and Malkus and Plesha, and also Zinkovich and Taylor. And these tricks of the trade, which we are discussing, that is reduced integration, inclusion of incompatible modes, and so on, these are referred to as variational crimes, for they effectively violate the governing variational principles. Right? For example, in reduced integration, we are intentionally under evaluating the integral. We are intentionally not accounting for the complete strain energy of deformation, as uh, we should be doing in uh, true analysis. But it is counterproductive, and it often leads to problems. So we under evaluate it, and uh, it sometimes works. So, as they say, crime sometimes pays, but one has to be extremely clever when working with this, right? So, crime pays only for clever people. For not so clever people, uh, one might as well stay away from committing any crimes. So, if you are going to use any of these clever tricks, make sure that you understand what you are getting into. Otherwise, the whole thing will just blow up on your face, and you won't even realize what hit you. So these tricks of the trade are referred to as variational crimes. Very interesting discussion of variational crimes. There are actually 6 variational crimes, and I recommend you to read a very small, if you can get your hands on it, very small monograph, a mathematical analysis of the finite element method by Gilbert Strang and Fix. Strang and Fix. So it is Strang and Fix which who actually first came up with this nomenclature, variational crimes, and you will find several video lectures by Gilbert Strang. So they are very interesting. He is, by the way, a professor of mathematics at MIT. So YouTube is full of lectures from Gilbert Strang. So you might as well listen to him talking about variational crimes and explain the concept. So let us explain this concept of incompatible modes. So primary cause of problem is low order of assumed displacement variation, that is linear variation plus one xy term, and the problem was absence of these x square and y square variation. So we just add x square and y square variation and make sure that this vanishes at the element boundaries, right? So this vanishes at x plus or minus 1, and this vanishes at y plus or minus 1, right? And this allows it to take care of that curvature, constant curvature shape, this quadratic term. And once we have this, the total variation is complete in quadratic. Similarly, V is also complete in quadratic. Of course, alpha and beta, they are different from one element to another element, and these are called, these are not associated, these coefficients alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, they are not associated with any nodes, and they are called as nodeless variables, since these parameters of the assumed displacement field are not associated with any node of the finite element. We are just adding this mode of deformation on top of what is already there in the element. But by adding this, we get the requisite variation, and the element will not lock after this. The offside being there is going to be incompatibility between the deformation of adjacent nodes in these uh, in terms of these particular modes of behavior, incompatible modes. So the corresponding functions sometimes referred to as the bubble function because they vanish at the end, so they look like bubble. Uh, they enrich the interpolated displacement field by introducing the desired higher order polynomial variation, and if we try to compute the shear strain for this modified 4-node rectangle, we obtain the relationship uh, as earlier, A2 plus B1 plus A3 minus twice beta 1 plus B3 minus twice alpha 2. Now the vanishing shear strain condition now involves correct behavior in the sense that in all the constraints the contribution is coming from both displacement fields, that is u as well as v. So here A3 is coming from displacement component u, beta 1 is coming from displacement component v. Here B3 is coming from displacement component v, alpha 2 is coming from displacement component u. So when we are talking of shear strain, both u and v, they participate together in the shear strain, and when we impose vanishing shear strain condition, both the displacement components are correctly constrained. An unfortunate side effect of this modification is that modified displacement field is now incompatible along the inter-element boundaries. Right? So, it is for this reason that higher order polynomial terms associated with the nodeless variables are termed as the incompatible modes. Although loss of compatibility is a serious breach of the basic requirements for convergence of finite element solution, some of these functions can be carefully selected, just as I mentioned that their contribution to strain energy integral should vanish in the case of constant stress state. So they can be carefully selected so that convergence of the finite element solution is guaranteed. The incompatible modes are selected so as to have zero contribution to the strain energy integral for constant strain states. Suitability of such modified finite element approximations in practical finite element analysis can be examined by using patch test. Right? Obviously, if we are doing uh, uh, if we are issuing so many caveats that okay, this can be done provided this is like this or this is like that or this element can sometimes work. So obviously this is not uh, building any confidence. So I need to have certain uh, definitive way to figure out whether the element that I am trying to use, whether it can be relied upon to give us a reasonable solution, and that is performed by using patch test, another seminal contribution from Bruce Irons. So patch test was also developed and proposed by Bruce Irons first, and then of course improved upon later by several other people. So reduced integration is another variational crime. So use of a lower order quadrature would result in underestimating element stiffness and thereby provide some relief from locking problem. So it is problem is somewhere else, you uh, try to seek relief from some other medication. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And this was one of the earliest tricks to circumvent the problem of shear locking, based on the observation that computed shear strain in a 4-node rectangle subjected to pure flexure vanishes at the centroid of the element that is x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0, which also coincides with the location of the sampling point of one point Gauss-Legendre quadrature, which is essentially one order lower than the full quadrature rule required for 4-node rectangle. The strain energy in shear would be correctly evaluated at 0 if one point quadrature rule is used for the evaluation of domain integral. For a 4-node rectangle, the domain integral B transpose dB integral over domain omega involves integration of polynomial terms up to second order, that is x square, xy and y square, which requires the use of a 2-point quadrature rule for correct evaluation. Yes, 1-point quadrature. If it is if the full quadrature rule is a 2 by 2 and if you are using 1-point quadrature, that is also a variational crime. Right? So, so reduced integration, while the true solution would require a 2 by 2 quadrature for correct evaluation, but we find that use of 1-point quadrature actually gives us better solution, and that was one of the earliest tricks to solve this problem, to circumvent this problem. I should not say solve this problem, uh, but it also has, it's a crime, sometimes pays, most of the time it hurts. So I will stop here. We will continue with the discussion of patch test in our next lecture. So, any questions? Fine. If there are no queries, then we stop here. Thank you.